Our thanks to Hela Petri for this keynote, for these highlights, for these insights, as it paves the way for the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to introduce to you your next panel, which will be focusing on resilience and soft skills, key competencies for the future. Moderated by Raya Bichari, founder and CEO, School of Humanity. Can we have a collective welcome?
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm excited to introduce a really profound panel. But before going into that, I'd like to set a few introductory remarks for why we're here today. For far too long, soft skills sat at the edge of curriculum. They were the afterthought, they were the extracurricular things that we do in high schools. But now we know that soft skills actually have hard value, and they need to be foundational and sit at the very core curriculum of both higher education, lifelong learning, as well as high school education. According to a recent study by Dell Technologies, 85% of the jobs that will exist in the future don't exist yet. Now, regardless of whether you believe the exact statistic, what we do know is that the only certainty is uncertainty. And in a future that's ever changing, the only way we future-proof young minds and human beings at large is by focusing on soft, transferable skills that will continue to apply regardless of what kind of future we're overcome with. Skills like creativity, innovation, problem solving, socio-economic, socio-emotional, and how to learn those are the kinds of soft skills that we need to have at the very core of all of our curriculum. Now today I'd like to invite an exciting panel of changemakers and leaders in the education space to talk about how we can practically move beyond having conversations about the importance of soft skills towards action from all stakeholders towards moving these soft skills into the very core of everything we do in the education system. So, I'd like to start by inviting Dr. Fanta, Vice President of Undergraduate Enrollment, Campus Life, and Inclusive Excellence at American University from Washington, to join me on stage. Can we also have a round of applause for Hamoun Ekhtiyari, who's the founder and CEO of FutureFit AI. We are also joined by Sally-Ann De La Casa, CEO and founder of GLIAC, as well as Ahmed Al-Handwi, Secretary General of the World Organization of Scout Movement. Last but not least, Simi Mogugu, CEO of GA Africa. And finally, Phil Noble from World Class Scholars. So as you can see, we have an amazing, diverse, large panel with us today. So we're going to have a lot of amazing perspectives. Now, I'd like to start with a question to everyone, starting with Dr. Fanta. Now, what are the challenges of moving beyond moving soft skills beyond being at the edge of the education system, which happens at extracurriculars or add-ons and internships, towards moving it to the core of the curriculum, and especially what this means for higher education?
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation. I would say first and foremost, perhaps we need to even begin by re-examining the nomenclature around this. I would like to invite us to stop using the term soft skills and instead use the term life skills. Because I think that in of itself creates implicit biases in terms of how we think about it. I would say first and foremost, the biggest challenge has to do with mindsets. Our students have told us in so many ways that in coming into higher education, they're coming in to really have transformational skills. That transformational skills that employers have indicated time and time again through so many surveys that at the end of the day, what matters most are those life skills. And so I would say mindset has been probably one of the primary challenges. And then the second challenge has to do with teaching and methodology of teaching. Our ability to be able to shift from what is sort of the current what current traditional modes of teaching, our students want to have teaching that is much more dynamic, that is much more interactive in the ways in which classrooms are set up to be for the most part. And so I would say mindset and then pedagogically are some of the challenges that we have.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more because we focus so much on teaching to knowledge rather than skills, so we need to reimagine everything around that as well. Hamoon, what do you think about the challenges that we have in moving soft skills to the very core?
Thanks, Raya, and thanks for having me here today. Our work at Future Fit AI is premised around this idea of what if you could use AI to build a career GPS, like a Google Maps for your career. And so that means we look at hundreds of millions of data points around jobs, resumes, CVs. And I think one of the things that comes out really clearly is the fact that we say soft skills matter, but we don't mean it. We don't actually mean it. You look at job postings, on average, employers put in 100 total soft skills in those postings that are the exact same high-level generalized titles like communication. On the technical side, there are tens of thousands of individual skills that show up in these job postings. That means we're getting specific and granular because we think those things matter. If we're going to have any chance at soft skills that we've been talking about, to your point, life skills for 50 years, calling them 21st century skills, becoming material, we're going to have to get a lot more specific than just calling it communication. We're going to have to talk about verbal communication in the context of a 6-person meeting. That is the skill we want to be developing. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to whether it's power skills, soft skills, or life skills, we run the risks, especially in PDF reports and conferences like this, to separate them so much from the reality of life people live that we think they can be developed independently in a room with white walls around it. These things are contact sports. Right? We have to live them through real life challenges, and they get developed through that journey, solving real problems, failing at them, and building the resilience and character necessary. So those would be a couple I would call out.
Amazing, thank you for that. And Salian, I know you have been pioneering this idea of human skills way before it was a buzzword. So could you tell us a little bit more about the challenges you have overcome in terms of making those human skills more prominent in the education system?
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, I've been at it for a while, and it's only since COVID has happened, everyone's like, that's what you've been up to. So, you know, I really liked what you just said about, you know, I call them human skills being contextual, and they're situational. And I think what has happened in the past, and they're dynamic, they're not static. So you can't signal that you have human skills with a certificate, because that does not mean you know how to apply it, and you don't know how to apply it in different contexts and situations. So I think that has been the difficulty, is we've tried to assess it, we've tried to signal it just like we do hard skills, and it cannot be. So where I spend a lot of my time at Gleek is creating a measurement system that allows job portals, so I tie into a lot of APIs with job portals, where they can integrate a way other than their traditional tagging of communication means communication across everything, which it does not, to be able to truly allow you to signal you have them in the context of others and through situations. And also to allow it to be almost like a FICO credit score. For those of you who are familiar with the American credit system, it's something that's fluid, that you should be able to interoperably attach or append. And I should be able to go in, just like a credit score, very transparently and see you apply it in the context of others. So it's a little bit of science, you know, qualitative, quantitative, feedback loop, but it's happening, Raya. It's happening now, and I'm proud to say that people actually know what I'm talking about now. I can have conversations.
Amazing. I think I appreciate your descriptions of soft skill development as something that's dynamic rather than static, which is what we're used to with traditional certification. Now, Ahmed, I'd love to hear from you. You know, as the Secretary General of the World Scouts movement, what have you seen as the power of soft skills, and how have you tried to bring them into the focus?
Well, thanks. Maybe just to bring to the conversation something. I mean, we talk about education as an end by itself. I think Kevin before me said it's just a mean to an end, and we need to come to terms also with how important we are and the ability of young people to acquire skills and learnings. Can I just say that we think we are way too important, we exaggerate our importance for young people's learning? Generally, the formal education system is exaggerating its importance for the development of young people today. Because learning is happening, and when you come from the non-formal education sector, such as Scouting, such as many other organizations working with young people to develop their skills, we're actually approaching this from what we call non-formal education and learning. They are measurable skills that you acquire. I was chatting with Phil before, and he told me that actually every single scout who is an Eagle Scout, what does it mean to be an Eagle Scout? It means to be like you have accomplished almost 50 badges of different skills, including team building, including problem solving, all these skills. He said anyone who comes with that designation of Eagle Scout is going to hire that person. And I wish you can't say the same about any degree you can get from any school in the world. That's why I think education system and formal education system actors, they tend to exaggerate how important they think they are. Actually, they even go further with that now by trying to adopt, and there's a trend that we capture today, we call the non-formalization of formal education. What does that mean? It means they're trying to take some of the skills or some of the tools and the methodologies that we apply in non-formal education programs and trying to bring them to the classroom. The problem with that is great, by the way. We encourage that trend. But the problem with that trend is it's still confined and still run with a traditional mentality that is accepting the hierarchy, that accepting still that the development of young people has to go through a very formal, rigid style of education, where we believe actually for this conversation, for rewiring education, for us not to be dinosaurs sitting here, we really have to acknowledge that this is no longer about trying to slightly reform a very aged, I would say, not in touch with the reality that's called the formal education system. We really need to go and explore the question of learning for young people. And I consider Scouting, I consider WISE, I consider the Red Cross, and many others. I consider in jazz, for those who are familiar with it in the region here, they are all great accelerators for learning that is actually compensating for the failure of the formal education system.
I love that. I think this underscores the importance, as you say, of not having soft skills just be slapped on the existing knowledge-based curriculum, but rather revisiting that core curriculum and reimagining it to focus on soft skills. Simi, what do you think about that?
I completely agree. I don't know. Can you hear me?
No.
I think Simi's mic is not working. Okay, do you want to hand this?
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Okay. Yes, I completely agree with everyone that's spoken, and thank you for mentioning INJAS because we're in the same network. So at JA, we believe that, and we've believed this for 100 years, so we're very happy that it's becoming core now, that you learn these types of skills by experiencing them, by practically engaging them. So it's not only through what is the traditional curriculum, but what is you learn by doing. Young people particularly learn more by doing. And so most of our programs are actually based on activities and games and things that they do practically. Our flagship program, the company program, actually engages them in setting up and running a business. And the skills they gain in those types of situations can't be learned in a textbook. Just even 30 students coming together and agree, this is the business we're going to pursue. And the arguments they have because everybody has an idea, you learn collaboration skills, you learn critical thinking, what's the most viable of the business. And at the end of it, they actually compete to figure out which is the best business in the country. And those skills all come out because they are learning how to present, they're learning how to convince, they're learning how to... So who says education even has to be linear? I mean, one of the things that you're talking about is rewiring education. I strongly believe that we'll move towards a situation where young people will have to come out of school, participate in the real world, and take those learnings back into school. So the more we think outside the traditional system and the more we bring in practical, real-world experiences, the more that we can prepare young people for the future of work.
Okay, my mic is it working? It's working, great. So as you say, you develop soft skills by doing, but you also do it by connecting and collaborating with others. And Phil, that brings us to you. I know you guys are connecting classrooms from around the world through world-class scholars. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and the kinds of soft skills development that you've seen through that?
Sure. The project that I work with is called World Class Scholars. And we are a real-time online exchange for schools around the world, for grades 1 through 12. And we're sort of like a dating site, if you will, Match.com or something else. We connect them. And then once they're connected, they work together, they learn together, they develop skills together, they do joint projects together. And that's the sort of magic of what we do, is putting them together. Because the natural curiosity of kids of all ages is really magical. And that's what we have somehow, just by almost dumb luck, figured out how to do, is connect the kids. And I probably shouldn't say this. I've been debating whether or not to say it for the last 3 minutes. And so I apologize in advance for anybody who's offended. But you're talking about these soft skills are something that you can only learn by doing. Well, we are about connecting kids and cultures around the world. Well, you can't connect and learn unless you connect and engage. It's sort of like saying we're going to learn to have sex by reading a book. You can't do that. You got to do it. And that's what we're about. We're about providing that opportunity for kids to develop real relationships with people around the world on an ongoing basis. And we've seen that magic happen because it's the direct physical relationship and connection between the kids that there's no substitute for that.
Wonderful. Now, I hope that we can go deeper into the practical side of focusing on soft skills in education. And I'm going to try to get some more, tactics and strategies from different people on the panel. So, Sally-Ann, one of the pushback we often get about soft skills is that they're difficult to measure. People often say, oh, it's subjective. There's no way of quantifying them. And I know you guys have done some amazing, innovative work around this. So could you please share some strategies that you have adopted around measuring the development and mastery of soft skills?
Sure. So on our platform, Gleek, our measurement system, there is a quantitative, qualitative, and 360 feedback. So let me explain what those words mean. So the qualitative part is there are 3 things that need to happen for you to develop a habit, right? So it's around the science of habit. You need to come and practice something often. The level of difficulty needs to change, more difficult, less difficult, and you need to have a feedback loop of people who can correct you. If you're practicing, it's like playing the piano. If you play every day, but you're playing wrong, you can play 10,000 times, you're not going to get better at it. So there is a simple qualitative part. Are you showing up? Are you practicing often within the parameter? There is that's the quantitative. The qualitative is, what does a technically correct answer would look like? And then soft skills is contextual. So human skills is contextual. You need to be able to apply it in different situations and have what others. So I don't know if you're good at leadership unless I see you amongst others applying leadership in that situation. I go, look at Raya, what she's doing there in that situation. So we use a combination of those things. And then, Raya, we also look at where in the world you're in, because critical thinking might look very different in the Ukraine than it might look in India or the US or some other part of the world. So also you have to, if you're going to, I often say human skills is the greatest equalizer more so than education. And some people don't like that, but it's the reality. Not all of us are going to have access to education, but all of us has human skills. And the measurement of it should be within the context and the country and the situation that you're in. So those are some of the ways that we've been measuring and signaling human skills.
Amazing, thank you. Dr. Fanta, I want to learn more about your thoughts on how higher education needs to be revamped about this. So to share a little bit of an anecdote, I did an undergraduate degree in neuroscience, and I remember memorizing textbook after textbook and taking tests. But it wasn't until I worked in a lab and actually did neuroscience that I realized what skills I needed to be a scientist. And I'm curious about what you think about the role of knowledge and academics in higher education. And do you think we need to completely move away from knowledge, or do we still need a bit of it as we revamp higher education?
Great. No, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and. I think we still do need knowledge because our students need to really have sort of the breadth and understanding of those complexities. I do think one of the things that I've seen certainly in the educational system that I'm part of is that that knowledge then becomes translated. It becomes translational in the sense of experiential and competency-based learning. And so exactly as you've mentioned, one of the ways you learn more about science was by being in a laboratory where it's actually going through the experiments. And you learn through trial and error. I think it's the same thing as often with experiential learning. Internships are example of that. Competency-based learning are examples of that. Simulations are examples of that. Case studies are examples of that. And so one of the revamping that needs to be happening is integrating within the curriculum as students are learning concepts, how do they actually apply those concepts? How do they reinforce those concepts in the real world? And I think the internships and things become really modalities in which you can really sort of apply that learning as we move forward. So it's not an either or, it's an and.
Amazing, and I'd love to imagine a higher education system where internships aren't an add-on, they're at the very core of the learning experience. Hamoon, what role do you think governments and corporations have to play, and especially partnerships between them, and how can they play a role in all of this?
Yeah, so for context, most of our work in bringing this vision around AI-powered career GPS to life is done with national and regional governments and corporations who are thinking about these questions. And I think maybe the quickly three themes that show up in those efforts. One is around this idea of us actually needing to start to care a lot more about arriving at destinations. Mm-hmm. So imagine if you order an Uber or a Careem cab, you get in the seat, and that is counted as success. That it's not about where you actually end and whether you get to your destination. That's mostly how we measure these things today, right? It's about you getting in that seat. And so there's a lot of shift towards we need to start measuring arrival at destination. Yes. Everything else is about a tool to achieve that outcome. So I would say that's number one, and that's where we're seeing a lot of both governments and corporations shift investments to say we're not just going to shift inputs and fund inputs and activities anymore. We're going to look for evidence of arrival outcome. The second piece is we've built systems of education providers, learning providers, training providers, service delivery organizations, but most of our systems are provider-centric. Mm-hmm. They're not centered around the individual. And so when you've got a provider-centric organization, every single provider says, come to us, we have the answer. In reality, imagine if you had to go to every single airline website, look through a PDF file to find the best flight to come to Dubai from wherever you were coming from. The thing that's most needed is wayfinding, navigation, guidance, and then figuring out what mix of supports from which set of providers help me get to my destination best, and then optimizing for that, like a Google Maps or a Waze might. And so I would say the second trend we see is that shift towards how do you provide guidance as people go along the journey, whatever that journey might be. And then maybe the final piece is around this shift from predetermining where the dollars go to flexible budgets in the hands of the individual, whether that's a young person, whether that's a recent graduate, whether that's a worker whose job's just been automated. What does it look like to put a direct budget in, and we've seen this in international development with models like Give Directly. Mm-hmm. What does it look like to invest directly against the individual and allow the set of supports to come to them and give them the agency of choice around their path, around what they want to do next, and investing them in a way that makes the most sense for them.
Amazing, and I think that goes towards the point of importance of curation. When you have the world of information at your fingertips, one of the roles of education is actually to curate the right pathways for every student. Simi, I'd love to hear from you about how do we certify and credential these skills, right? So one of the roles that traditional examination boards and certifications plays is signaling mechanisms of saying, hey, I did this or I know this. And it's much more challenging at this point in time when it comes to soft skills. So I'm curious about your experience and how you guys have tackled this.
Sure. At JA, we developed an entrepreneurial skills pass in partnership with the EU, and really it's an exam that measures these skills that you've talked about, the entrepreneurial skills, the financial knowledge, and all the soft skills inherent in it. And the students who go through it go through several different stages of the exam, at the end of which they're certified whether or not they have that skill. We're finding that that is more and more important, both for the student perspective and the employer perspective, because it certifies that, yes, they have gained those skills. You can measure it, and you can see that in participating in company program or other entrepreneurship programs, they've gained these skills. In general, I think we also try to, we've done a study with Oliver Wyman to look at what employers look for and how we can fit those things into our program. And so we continually improve our programs to include structured internships, just as Dr. Fanta said. So it's not only at the higher education, but even at the secondary school level. I think the younger you start with mindset and skill set, the more that you're able to actually really develop these skills in young people.
And Ahmed, I know you talked about the badging that you guys do and the gamification side of things. So I'm very curious from the World Scout movement, your response to the same question. How do you think we ought to recognize these skills and certify them in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, the badging is the most, of course, recognizable sign of like a progression, because it's both, I mean, following like a life cycle approach, but at the same time, there's that element of like silver progression. But beyond that, I think the challenge, I mean, to your point, is once you get out of these organizations, how you can convince others that actually these are worthy badges and they are also they're signaling a certain level of progression or acquiring certain skills. That's where we still don't have good luck with, actually. We're still trying to advocate in part of these conversations, trying really to widen the education community lens, and even the employers, to see the totality of education as formal and non-formal learning, so they would equally recognize. I mean, this is the trillion-dollar question, how we can ensure that the ones who are now dropping out of schools and the universities, I mean, and this trend is no longer like a Steve Jobs kind of a trend, I'm going to drop Harvard and just going to start my business. I find a lot of young people today who are deciding not to actually invest in 4 years of university education, and they would like to find their own way of acquiring the skills. And I would argue, actually, young people today learn more from YouTube than from their universities. I mean, YouTube will not award you a certificate at the end telling a financial analyst, right? But and that goes for us in scouting, same problem. I think if there's one question that I would say, as we are progressing, we need really to figure out how to establish a better global recognition or even national recognition for skills you acquire off the formal education system, but they definitely make you a better citizen and a better employee.
Absolutely, and I think a part of that challenge is also not just getting other organizations to recognize those skills, but getting governments to also recognize and attest those skills. So usually alternative educations have this challenge of when they create a new type of curriculum, but the Ministry of Education recognizes it, right? So that's part of what inhibits a lot of innovation in curriculum as well. And that brings me to you, Phil. I'd love to hear from you, because you also have a lot of amazing experience in governance. So I'd love to hear from you about the role of policy and leadership from a government level in creating soft skills focus in the education system.
This may sound counterintuitive, but I don't have a lot of confidence that government can ingrain soft skills, to be quite often. Governments increasingly around the world, starting in my native country of the United States, has just become almost a food fight between two sides. And if there was ever any institution that was in need of soft skills of learning to communicate and be kind and generous, and I mean, it's government. So again, I don't mean to be flip about it, but I don't think government, other than saying, yes, that's a good thing that we should do, I don't think government has much of a role to play because, they got to clean up their own act before they tell these young people, say, let me tell you how to behave. Now, we don't behave that way, but you should. I think a lot of that's just the hypocrisy of so many governmental organizations trying to tell young people what it is they should do when it probably isn't going to work anyway. They ain't going to listen. Now, I don't know if that's what you want me to say, but I think that's what's true.
Phil, if as a Canadian, I can offer a bit of an alternative perspective on the question of government, I would say you're absolutely right that our governments are failing on a number of fronts, and they're not the best examples of these skills at display. But I would say we might not want to discount the role they can play if pushed enough.
Absolutely.
Because many of them do have measurement systems in place that measure the student, that measure the teacher, that measure the school, and those are being determined at a level of policy. Now, we got to make sure they're done right, they're measuring the right things, but they're not today focusing on these things that we're talking about matter. And so if there was a role for them to play, I would say is around those measurement systems, because they drive so much of the behavior positively and negatively in the system today. And so that might be one place.
Can I just add, sorry, where the role of government is more important. I can tell you where I'm most concerned about governments really stepping up. For me, the 203 million, 30 million in fact, who are out of school and schooling age, and in countries where you cannot bridge this gap. I think the Microsoft speaker this morning was saying if you want to go wide, you have to work with government. Absolutely have to work with government to figure out solutions that will bring those who are not accessing, not even accessing quality, just to start with a simple access for education. That's where you need governments. But I think as you expand more, you will find this world is very well divided between the haves and have-nots. There you need a government to help them to access, and there you have others who are finding alternative tools of education where the government is the least of their concerns, in fact.
Absolutely.
Can I
Just to add to that, sorry, just to add to that in Africa, where I'm from, it's the government that can actually provide the enabling platform to scale some of these initiatives. And you can see when we had the COVID pandemic, where they had to shut down a number of schools, and the elite private schools could go online, but majority of the schools in Africa could not. And so that's where government could have stepped in and actually powered the schools for internet connectivity and ability to really connect with other classrooms around the world. So government does play a key role, and it's really an enabling role.
And just one last point on that. I mean, I think, the fact that we're here in the UAE today is a great example of how government can shift the needle. I remember when I first came into the region, we have the KHDA, and the KHDA, really kind of creates the review of the schools here in the region. And, they started focusing on student well-being, and that became one of the indicators on the scorecard on how well students were doing. Teacher well-being, implementing across at a government level, teachers having CPD, continuing professional development, accreditation. So there are many things that can be done. I mean, if it were required, one of the fundamental flaws in human skills, going back even to the adults, is if we don't actually look at the layer that interacts with our students, which is our teachers, and they're always left behind. And if we cannot teach what we do not have within us, and we're leaving it to career teachers to teach workplace skills and human skills that many of them have only ever been career teachers. Yet we want to teach them to be ready, teach students to be ready for a workplace in a ever-evolving changing of jobs that teachers have no experience or even know themselves, and we're not teaching them and training them with those skills. So I think government can play a role, and the UAE is a great example of how it can be done. There's still a lot to do, but it can be done.
Absolutely. I think this dialogue was a great example of the importance of global voices. It's so different from region to region. And we absolutely agree. I think ultimately it's the government ministries of education that set the standards that schools have to abide by, and those standards can either hinder or contribute to progress in the education space. Now, I know we're slowly coming to the end of the session, but I would love to open it up to the panel to ask you, what are some of your favorite examples of skill-based curriculum? And while you gather your thoughts, I wanted to share 2 examples. Earlier today, I was on a panel with a representative from Finland who shared that in Finland they have a completely outcome-based curriculum where they have these sets of skills that they want all learners to master, and they assess to those skills, but how they master those skills is completely up to them and personalized. I know at School of Humanity we adopt a completely skill-based curriculum made of competencies, mindsets, and behaviors that cross-cut through all the disciplines in an interdisciplinary way. So for anyone who wants to really jump at this, like, what are some of your favorite examples of skill-based curriculums, either in schools, universities, or the workforce that you think work really well?
The one that comes to mind are institutions where you really cannot graduate without going through a cooperative education program, right? You simply, irrespective of what your major or your minor might be, you have to go through a cooperative education program. And the advantage of such a skill-based curriculum is that it's not the faculty who's assessing the learning. It is actually the employer or the site of activity that is assessing the learning, and therefore it's not sort of arbitrary in some ways and sort of self-evaluation of your learning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fanta. Anyone else want to share? Yes, Phil.
Yeah, I think the things that work are the things that come from the lowest possible denominator, the teachers in the classrooms who know the kids, know what motivates them, knows how to move them. And I ultimately put my faith in those folks. And again, forgive me, I spent 30 years of my life working in politics in 50 countries around the world, and that's why I put my faith in teachers. So I think it's, the technology enables us to empower teachers on the local level. And that's where I put my faith. That's where I put my hope. And not, you know, a top-down guy in an office at the top of an office building. But again, forgive me from my perspective if that offends people, but that's my perspective.
No worries. Ahmed, go for it.
I would actually counter that a little bit just to say we're finding, in my experience, that yes, you want to empower the teachers, but you want to empower them to take less of a teaching role in the classroom and more of a guide. Yes. I find that where the students actually are empowered to do the learning by themselves and then come to class and sort of argue and debate with the teacher as a guide, you find that a lot of those skills are being developed more because they are participating, they're taking active participation in their learning versus passive, where they come in and they learn from a teacher. And so I think in those situations where my son's high school, they developed this Harkness method where everything is taught that way. And at first I was like, how do you teach math that way, where there is no teacher, but they're the students teaching each other, and it really works. So I think if we can bring more skills-based programs like that, where it's the students who are empowered to research and then come teach each other, with the teacher being more of a guide, you find them developing those skills more easily.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I mean, the best kind of government officials you work with are the ones who know they don't know, and they ask for help. Now, they're very difficult to find, by the way. They don't exist. But the ones who are asking for help and bringing you in to help them. So I don't think they need to really fix everything. Our global membership in scouting today, we have 57 million young people worldwide who are enrolled in our programs. Almost half of that numbers are the result of our partnership with ministries of education. So there's school-based scouting happening next to the program. So just by inviting other organizations who can help you develop additional skills with extracurriculum or life skills, where it might be very difficult to fix the entire education system, but you can actually fast track a lot. And by fast tracking some of these solutions, you're actually offering opportunities now, not in 10 years of strategy until it brings to fruition, but just really in the now and here. So I think that model should work and should be expanded to other organizations too.
Absolutely, and that brings us to the end of the panel, actually. So ladies and gentlemen, I have been speaking at conferences on education since I was 16 years old, and I think we all agree that it's time to move from conversations to action. So I encourage you all to take what you've learned today from our amazing panel and actually apply it. If you're from a government organization or Ministry of Education, revisit your graduate competency framework at a national level and make sure you're focusing on measuring and recognizing soft skills. If you're from universities, think about how you're going to revamp your higher education curriculum, but also accept students from high schools that have skill-based curriculums rather than traditional curriculums. And if you're from corporate, continue to identify what those skills are for your emerging workforce and continue to build them in a lifelong learning manner. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. You can find our panel later at the conference, and please come speak to them. Thank you.
Thank you.